Welcome to the second studio by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. The two of us are partners at the office, architects, and of course, hosts of this podcast. And today, it's a casual after-hours conversation. And for our listeners who have been listening to us for some time, they know what's up, right?
You sound like you're falling asleep, so...
I'm a little drowsy. It's kind of toward the end of the day, maybe. Yes.
Now, after hours means casual conversation between the two of us. We usually do this recording in our recording studio, which is basically a black box covered in felt.
Yeah.
But today we're doing things a little bit differently.
Yeah, we are recording out of the studio and on site. Is that the technical AV term?
On location.
On location,
however you
right,
say.
right. And where is this located? Oh, someone's going to sneeze. So we are recording in a house in Lake Tahoe that was designed by an architect, and it's a contemporary take on, I think, a cabin. Right? Is that fair?
I mean, there's nothing like that around, I have to
true.
say.
So
it's very unique.
In the link of the description, you'll find links to see more images of this, and of course, that's also an Airbnb. So if anyone's interested in staying in South Lake Tahoe, and you are interested in design and want to stay at a place that's not typical and very cool, then this is the place to be. All right.
And if you live in Tahoe and you want a staycation, just come here too on the weekend.
This is true. A staycation in Tahoe. Yeah. So what are we going to talk about? I don't know. We'll figure it out. But let's get going. Right. Sponsors.
The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk.
Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire.
Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders.
The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to contribute to this podcast. Learn more about Autodesk by clicking the link in our episode notes.
My dear fellow architects, do you know the current spend on your budget? Can you forecast your next 6 months of performance? Do you know the status of all of your projects? Have your team hours been effectively allocated? If you struggle to answer these questions quickly and easily, then you need to explore Monograph. Monograph is a performance management platform. It helps you and your firm make better day-to-day decisions and anticipate what's next with powerful forecasts. It's designed by architects for architects. Monograph gives you less obscurity, more visibility, less ambiguity, more clarity, less admin, more design. You have to see it to believe it. Your performance becomes a lot easier to manage because it's no longer hiding from you. Tap the Monograph.
We are supported by Skyframe. Skyframe is the world's leading frameless sliding doors and windows system. Their products feature large panes of glass that span from floor to ceiling, flush transitions, minimal hardware to create a seamless connection between the inside and outside. Their system is top tier, ultra smooth, and low profile. How do they do this? Well, they're a Swiss company, and they're all about precision. They develop and manufacture all of their premium products in Switzerland at their own state-of-the-art production facility. Click on the Skyframe link in our episode notes to learn more.
So we are staying in this house for a couple of nights. And so what's nice is that we can talk a little bit about the house as from a perspective where you get to experience it more than a typical building, which is you just kind of walk through it maybe. Right.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because we get to design a lot of, homes, right? But we don't always get to experience the ones that we've designed. We have not designed this one, but someone else did. And being able to experience maybe even just someone else's design, I think is very interesting because then you become the user and not the designer. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of things like, I don't know, like sliding doors or like a reveal or like lights on motion sensors or things that you would put in your set of drawings and you would think about for a project, but actually using it on a day-to-day basis is very interesting. And it almost made me think, if you're a client about to do a project and you don't really know what you want or what you like, I think staying at an Airbnb that's been designed by an architect or a designer could be actually a good way to test run some things in some ways,
Do you mean generally speaking? So like,
yeah, like, I don't know, do you like a steam shower, but you don't have one at home right now? Okay, well, stay at a place that has a steam shower. Right. Do you like the cooktop to be on the island or against, the backsplash wall? Just kind of like user things, or even see like, okay, do you prefer drawers? Keep your plates in a drawer. Your house doesn't have that. You can make the decision without practically having testing it out.
I was thinking more on the lines of, let's call it styles of homes.
Oh, that too.
Because I do feel
the feeling of.
I mean, I get what you're saying, but I do feel like a lot of the more functional things most people have in the back of their minds already, because they're experiencing what they like in their house, and they're experiencing very strongly what they don't like, and they come to the table with a whole list of I like this, I don't like that, and 99.9% of the time it's more functional small things, which are important, because if you add all those up in the experience of a day or a month or a year, it would make your life at home either very enjoyable or just really, really annoying. I think the thing that's more difficult to test is that if I'm a client, I see images of things in magazines and I like how it looks, but it's because you like how it looks, that doesn't mean that you're going to like living within it.
Right.
Let's say for the majority of the time, if it's a primary residence. So that's an interesting idea, like using Airbnbs as a way to kind of test how you feel in spaces.
I might start giving that as homework to our clients. Okay, you are being tasked to stay at 3 different Airbnbs. Yeah. And tell me how you feel about it.
Well, we did have that one time. There were some clients of ours who knew they wanted something like contemporary, but they had experienced staying overnight for a few days or whatever it was at a place that had a big kind of great room loft interior space, and which again, a lot of times in publications and images look very enticing, modern and clean and open. And their point was, we like openness, but our experience was it was super echoey, and we could never feel like we were in different spaces. We were just in this big vacuous thing that was loud and echoey.
Well, and they liked concrete, right? And the space had concrete floors. So they like the look of concrete, but once they get to actually experience using and living in that space, they realize that's absolutely not for them. Yeah.
I was almost wondering if there could be like, I guess it would be Airbnb, but if there's another business model or some other way to experience houses, but I guess essentially that would be Airbnb.
That's probably your best bet.
Yeah, I'm thinking specifically just for architects, but that's probably like super niche.
But even for architects, I mean, I feel like I've learned some things by staying in this house.
Of course.
And I think if you don't get to travel often, let's say, or travel in other countries, let's say, I think that's also kind of an easy way to travel and to learn in terms of design is by staying in a place that's somewhat interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thought that came to mind, you were talking about concrete floors, and I was mentioning large great rooms, essentially, that have different functions, but just one space, is the noise aspect. Mm-hmm. And I was conversing with someone not long ago, and they also, I believe, a lot of people like concrete floors, concrete walls, and these kinds of materials. And but they were really concerned about echo and noise and the comfort of noise level. And it's a really, really good point.
Yeah, because you oftentimes, clients would make decisions based on the, like tactile or visual, right? Mm-hmm. But acoustic is a big one, and you don't really get to experience that until like it's done.
I think it's also a more elusive aspect of designing a house or a building, because so for people who are listening who are not architects or don't have that background, in the training of an architect, you learn about materials, tectonics, which is the study or the craft of how different things fit together, space, program, the activities, having a concept and responding to site. And nowadays, in the last decade or 15, 20 years, sustainability practices at a fundamental level of where the sun path is and where the wind is. And that's probably about the big ones that I can think off the top of my head, and structure, of course, to a limited degree. But sound is not something that I would say the vast majority of architects are trained in. Like, I would say 99.99%. It's not. You learn how to, through experience, realize what you're doing when you're drawing it. Like, okay, this is going to be very, very intense and echoey, but it's not something part of the training at school, for example, or it's not one of those like the 7 things I listed. It's not one of those 7 things. It's just background knowledge at best.
When and even in terms of using acoustic as a component of the design is not always a thing that comes to mind, because it's very hard to predict or even understand how it works unless you're starting to actually like do serious analysis of it. Wanting spaces that are very quiet, it's easy because we know we just have to make the walls thicker and super well insulated and pad with soft materials and stuff, right? But like echo might be a little bit harder to foresee before it's getting built, unless you actually look at what's in the space and how the sound would bounce around.
It's an interesting topic because I don't know. I'd be very curious to like do a poll of 1,000 architects to see how many of them and how often in their projects think about sound as being a thing. I mean, we think about it. It's oftentimes not the thing that's at the forefront. It's not leading the design. But it could be a significant factor. You move generally from more public spaces that are shared to more private ones. You kind of expect there to be less echo and it to feel more private in that sense. There are definitely plenty of not plenty, but there are definitely buildings that were designed by architects that play with sound intentionally. But again, it's just not as common as the other things I mentioned.
No, and oftentimes it's used on a specific purpose. More like, okay, there's a fountain in the entry patio.
I just spilled water all over myself.
Oftentimes like you would see kind of like acoustical features, things that were critically implemented just to become kind of interesting, right? Like let's say you have a fountain in an entry patio because you want people to come in your front door with the sound of running water, right? That's created on purpose and it's meant to be noticed, right?
Yeah.
And then there is the sound that is not meant to be noticed. And, let's say like you're lining up your kitchen shelf with felt. So when you put dishes down, you don't hear the sound of dishes down on the wood, right? Like, so it's interesting. I think
fountains are the one thing that's probably used the most for sound as like a feature element. And that's mostly obviously with outdoor spaces. And anyone who like studies urban design, like there's a reason why when there's an urban plan or a courtyard, you often find a fountain in the middle, because it tends to be awkward to have an exterior courtyard public space with like just empty.
It's
generally
quiet.
It's awkward. So you like stick something in the middle, and a lot of times people default to fountains, which is at the one hand the dumb answer, but at the same time the answer that works. Because it's water, it's fundamental, it has sound, it makes sense. But it's and in a garden space, like we were in someone's backyard not long ago, to have a little water feature kind of in the periphery, really functions well to block out outside noise and to create an environment.
And that's a thing that's been used for centuries, right? It's a thing that's more than everywhere in like Japan or China, right? So it's nothing new, but it's interesting to think about sound outside of like the cute water fountain. Like what else? What other sound could be, inside a house? Like you don't have pebbles here on the floor. You don't have gravel. You don't have.
Well, I was just going to say
olive tree branch, shivering around when there is the door is closing. So
in more common houses, you don't have that stuff. But that was the first thing I was going to say is pebbles. But pebbles don't. It's difficult to have pebbles in a primary house. You know what I mean?
If you live in a hut, then maybe.
but yeah, and even the transition from hard flooring to carpet. That's obviously libraries have carpet for that reason. To deaden sound. Also, why I always have an allergy attack in every library, because it's just a bowl of dust.
I've never understood carpet. It's like you live on a mat that you're never going to be able to really put in the washer.
Yeah.
but it's okay. You're going to walk barefoot on it. You want to lay down on it. You want to have your kid put their toys and put it in their mouth. Like, it's totally fine. And I find it so gross.
I agree. This is my same position regarding dogs. People wash their dogs like once every 2 weeks. I'm like, it's disgusting. If you had a furry baby, you'd wash it every day. What are you doing?
Yeah, I guess. Well, if you sleep with your dog, yeah, you probably should wash it every day. But if you don't, then I don't know.
No, I get what you're saying with carpet for sure. Fortunately, I think like we're not in a time where carpet is the big thing, shag carpet and all that stuff.
Well, shag carpet is like next level, okay? But like California still has a ton of buildings with carpet.
Old ones.
Well, yeah, older ones, but and a lot of rentals, for example, have carpets, which to me makes no sense at all. If you want something that's durable, easily cleanable, and that would survive tenants, just put some flooring that's not carpet.
What about rugs? You got to have rugs for sound, for
I
comfort.
like rugs. I'm a rug person.
Yeah, we don't clean rugs as much either.
Well, you could take it to the cleaner. You could use a shampoo thing and shampoo the rug. Like, you could clean it. Mm-hmm. But if you have a giant room with carpet, unless you rip it out every year and change it, it's still gross.
I have problems with carpet mostly because of allergies. It's like the library. It's that, but inside the house. I don't want that.
It just grosses me out. I have no allergies, but every time I vacuum carpet and I see what comes out, I'm like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And there's still a bunch left on it,
Yeah, okay. So if you want to solve the acoustics, no carpet. Sorry. That's not the answer. You could have rugs. You could have, obviously, large, flat, hard surfaces are terrible for acoustics. Like showers, for example, if you have full height enclosed glass, that box is super echoey. Which could be good for singing, but not so great.
A shower to be a little bit more quiet, it's a little bit more difficult because you do need mostly tile or hard materials.
So you're using some woods.
Yeah.
Some cedars, so it smells like the outdoors. Where am I? Outdoors? No, indoors. But it smells like the outdoors.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
What else for acoustics? Actually, it's kind of interesting because of the worst thing for acoustics would be a perfect cube space, perfect, rectilinear cube space. That's all hard surfaces. Actually, for acoustics, when you have a corner of a cube, that's death. That's where stuff echoes like bananas. So funky angles are good. Also building bass traps with acoustic insulation, but that's more of a sound studio situation. But it's the corners. The corners are what cause problems.
That's what David the architect learned when he built the recording studio. Corners are bad.
And from also playing music for quite some time.
Oh yeah,
you learn to. That's why also I loved playing in the bathroom. It sounds good. Lots of echo. Doesn't matter if I'm out of tune.
Did you used to play in the bathroom?
Yeah, but it's really hard on the ears.
Playing trumpet in a bathroom sounds like loud. Crazy. And then you're like, I can hear. I have some hearing problems. Yeah, well, I'm not
I don't
kidding.
say that.
Now, soon you will.
No, I
soon
won't.
You will.
You say that about me, but what I say is you need to speak up.
French people can understand me, so...
You never speak to French people.
That's not true.
Who do you speak with that are French?
My parents.
Oh, okay, yeah. They can hear you via Zoom or whatever. That doesn't count.
No, but French people can... We're not used to speak loud in France, so I'm not... I spend most of your life whispering. My life in... In France, no, because not everybody needs to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I would say that we both tend to talk more on the quiet side when we're in public compared to other people. Some people are like really loud, and everyone can hear their business, and I'm not really interested in that.
You can spot tourists in France easily. They're the loudest people in a restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rude. So it's interesting, but anyway.
Yeah, I will say that staying in this house. And actually, anytime I see a piece of architecture that was designed by somebody, I always shake my head, and I just think, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, which is a dumb thing because this is what I do. But I'm still impressed. Like, we were at a job site, and they were in the middle of construction, had framing and like concrete walls, and I was like, fuck, it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's an immense amount of work. And I want to like pat everyone on the back, excuse me, who's involved and be like, good job for making it this far. Really, because obviously we know what it takes, but it's all the things that you don't see in the process. Like in this house, if anyone listening, you look at the photographs, which you should. There are a lot of different angles and things, complex geometries, angles, and things line up in the corners. And it's like I spent time just staring at the corners going, God, it's a lot of work.
You did. I was exploring everything else, but you're just staring at the alignments of things.
Alignment, man. It's so hard.
Well, and that's something that I think people underestimate, especially when they want modern design and modern architecture, is the precision that it takes from the designer and the builder to do it right.
From everybody.
It takes a lot of figuring out because, again, you don't see what's behind the walls and what's holding things together. And you don't see like, okay, we had to figure out that we have to build this part first in order to build this part second. But wait a minute, this needs to be cut here. So how do we do it? Like the whole brain power and sequencing that goes into just putting it together, you know.
I would describe like the designing process. It feels like you're creating a puzzle. It's puzzle making and puzzle solving simultaneously because you're creating it from scratch, but you're also having to make everything lock in together. And it's a puzzle not just for the sake of it looking good, but you throw in there all the stuff that I mentioned earlier, all those things at once. And then typically, not for every project, but for typically, right, at some point, the structural engineers consulted and other consultants, stakeholders, and they propose what should go on the house to keep it up. Then the architect puts that in, and you realize it doesn't work. So there's a negotiation and reworking of the puzzle potentially to make that. But what you're talking about is, and that's difficult. Then there's like the whole construction thing, and the contractor is the one who has to like reverse engineer, reverse the puzzle and be like, okay, but how are we actually going to build this in the sequence that makes sense?
And you know, sometimes contractors say, like, oh, you know, the architect didn't really think about how we're going to put this together. No, we didn't, because that's not our job. That's not our expertise. We don't know like means and methods. I mean, we have a rough sense of, okay, maybe, you know, we're going to need some help here, but we can't design to that level because we don't have that much knowledge in terms of construction.
Time.
But also there is not enough time for us to figure it all out in advance.
And that's not to say that architects should not be thinking about the how it happens, because of course we do, but not to the nth degree, not to the degree of like, okay, we've problem solved everything about just the components, first of all, and then also how it gets sequenced and put together. It is impossible. And as much as we're always preaching that you should, before embark construction, have like a full set of construction documents for reasons we always discuss, despite us always saying that, it's unreal. You cannot have a construction document set that contains all that information. You could, in theory, but it would take forever.
No, but it doesn't make sense. It's impossible. What makes more sense is to have a contractor involved early in the design phase, so they would be like, hey, guess what? You want to have this giant piano in this tiny room. We're going to have to bring the piano before we build the room, you know? And then we're like, oh, okay, you know.
Fitting large things through openings. That's it's like...
You know, that's something that I think people don't think often. Yeah. And maybe because these days rooms have a tendency to be a bit bigger than what they used to be. But if you live in any older apartments or home and you're trying to move like a giant couch around or a piano around or whatever else, you might not be able to. You know?
Yeah. Well, you know, you pop out some windows, get a crane. Easy
that
peasy.
Actually happened in one of the offices I worked at in New York. The client had this apartment facing Central Park South, and she had a piano that she wanted in, and they had to take out the window to put the piano in.
Yeah.
You know, like rent a crane and do all that good stuff for a piano.
Yeah.
I'm like, you could just play piano on your iPhone these days.
If you,
why do you still need a piano?
If you have the money, it's not, it's quote,
no, it's not
a big
an issue,
deal,
right?
You know?
Nothing is an issue.
Uh-oh. One camera down, but the most important camera is still running. The one that's on you. All right. So what are we talking about then? We covered a lot of things so far. Yeah. So, but being in this house, I think mostly it's just impressive as to how much thought it takes to put together these kinds of things.
It does. At the same time, I'm thinking, you know, this house has a lot of intricacies. but the design feels pretty simple in some ways. Which when you know how to like design and build stuff, it's not that simple. And it makes me think, oh man, if every single home out there could at least be good on the most basic level, like everybody's like life inside those places would be so much better.
Yeah.
Because it does feel good to be in a space that has been thought of.
Well, they were asking about like the value of architecture, or rather, how does and can architecture create value? The value of architecture could be roughly split up into two sides. There's probably more to it, but there's clearly the financial value that comes out of it, and then there's the experiential. But the real estate value is a tough thing for architecture.
Yeah, it's harder to quantify. You can be like, oh, well, my house is 3-bedroom and 2 kitchens, so here's the value of a house with 3-bedroom and 2 kitchen. But a house that was designed by so-and-so and it's well done, whoever is going to estimate the value of this property is going to be kind of up to them.
Yeah.
Which doesn't always make sense. You see a lot of homes out there that have crazy financial values attached to them, and I look at them
and they're shit.
And I'm like, I don't know where it is. I don't know. I mean, yeah, you're in the right town, in the right street, but guess what? No, this is just a stack of sticks and that's it. You probably should rip it apart.
I don't know where it is. Where's the value? I don't see it.
No, I mean, it's interesting. And to say that, honestly, you don't need to spend a whole lot to make a home valuable.
Right.
In terms of its
actual value, not the
its actual value
monetary.
as what a house is supposed to provide you. Yes, a house has a financial value associated with it, but mostly the house is supposed to support how you live on a day-to-day basis and be good at doing that. Otherwise, it's not a house. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I think, and I don't know, maybe. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking like Europeans, like the Danish or Swedish have more of that philosophy about their homes and inside of their of their homes that maybe Americans do, and it probably goes back to centuries of cultures and how people consider things and treat things. But again, whenever I go inside a house that's like shit, I'm like, man, you could be so much happier. You could be much more efficient. You could actually enjoy being at home. You could actually find where your stuff is if there is a place for it. Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, most of the homes, like 98% of them, are crap. Not just in terms of construction quality, which is oftentimes the case, but in terms of how it makes you feel and how it performs as a machine for living. And what that means is that most people have only experienced that. So they don't actually know what it feels like to be in a space that is designed for them, or even a space that wasn't designed for them, but just a well-designed space. And so it becomes very difficult to convey that to somebody because you're trying to sell them something that they have not felt yet, and you almost need to experience it. Or they need to have, watched documentaries and read books and like been involved in architecture and design. But without that, you're just selling words and nice images.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I feel like people often reach out to architects thinking that their value is in the technical things, or their value is to get a construction permit, or their value is to figure out the floor plan. And it is, but the value of an architect is for them to create a home, a place that makes sense. A place that is built for you, a place that supports how you live and what you do, right? It's not just the technical stuff. It's not just the exterior walls. It's not just how many partitions and doors there is. It's about the feeling of the space. It's about the feeling of what that home wants to be.
Yeah, that's well said.
No, it's true. But it kind of annoys me because, again, I feel like people just think we're good at numbers. And it's like, you come here, you stay here. This has nothing to do with numbers, right? This has to do with where is the light coming from? What is the window looking at? How big is the window? How does the door open? Does it slide? Does it pocket in? Does it swings, right? Where is the hood in the kitchen? Oh, it comes down from the ceiling, like what is it made of? It's sort of that stuff that just accumulate to create the home. And I don't think people are really very much aware that that's the value that an architect can bring to their house. And it could just be in a remodel too. It doesn't need to be a new construction, and it doesn't need to have to be with using expensive finishes. Which I think, again, sometimes people think like, well, I'm going to hire an architect. It's going to cost me a lot, and what I'm going to build is going to cost a lot. No, I mean, there's architects who do work that doesn't cost very much, that's very effective. Yeah. And again, as long as they know exactly how to do it, it could be done really well.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think the misconception people have of architects being really good at numbers, which they are generally, but that's sort of the primary side of the brain that they're hired for. I don't know why that's there. We still get confused with engineers all the time. We were just talking to some people the other day, and they were mentioning stuff about architects. I'm like, but that's the engineer's job. They're like, well, architects, that they don't understand this and that. There are these problems that happen. I'm like, that's the engineer's job. Yeah. Like, the engineer messed up, the architect didn't mess up, and the contractor probably didn't build it right. Obviously it's a teamwork, so like everyone should check each other and everyone should be doing things that make sense. So if you're an architect, right, and you're working with an engineer and a contractor and they both say you should not do this and you don't listen, then yes, it's the architect's fault. But in most of the cases, people are still confused with the architect and the engineer regarding like loads of things, and like that. What?
We don't calculate loads. Like, that's not what we do. But that's the thing, is that as architect, it's very hard for us to sell where our value is, which is the complete design.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job of it.
Okay, well, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's hard to, at first it's very hard to explain, because it's a complicated process. It's a complicated thinking process, design process, construction process, team process, everything process, right? So it's very hard to explain that to people in like a sentence or two, to explain this is what we do, right?
Yeah.
So it often, I feel, maybe just gets narrowed down to like one thing or two that just people catch from that conversation.
Yeah.
And also, if they've never experienced let's say the power of architecture or the power of the work of an architect, they don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And describing it becomes very, very difficult.
That's what I'm saying. Almost. Like, they should just stay at this Airbnb or another Airbnb for like, 2 days and actually experience what it feels like to be in a space that was designed.
Everyone in the United States knows Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
And they probably know a few other big name architects locally if they've ever considered hiring an architect. And they've seen magazines of Dwell, of Wallpaper, of whatever. So they've been exposed to that level of architecture, and they know that architects do that. And I don't understand why they would have that understanding of the architect for those things. And an architect is needed to create those amazing things. And yet, when they revert to the rest of the architects, they default to, well, they're going to do floor plans and calculations of structures and numbers things and framing and whatever else they think that architects do. And I don't know why there's that gap, because again, speaking as an architect, the training of most architects is not split. You don't have architects who are trained to do Frank Lloyd Wright work and then architects who are trained to do the other kind of more pragmatic aspects of being an architect. No, everyone's trained to be the Frank Lloyd Wright person and to think that way at the very least. Do we all get to do that kind of work? No. Is everyone capable of doing that work? No. But nevertheless, on a smaller scale, on the scale of what maybe you were describing in some cases, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't have to be a big project. It doesn't have to have the fanciest materials, but it's still operating at the Frank Lloyd Wright way in that you're creating design for somebody. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting that there is these two categories of architects that somehow they're classified that way. It's like, do you think that Frank Lloyd Wright and whatever the big name architect of your town is the one who's just going to do quick things and again, more pragmatic tasks for you? No. Well, then why would you think that?
Do you think Corby would have been hired to do a pyramid set? Yeah. That's it, and maybe like run some roof load calculation for your house.
And it could be that maybe they just think that there's different types of architects, and they're like, I don't need the greatest architect for this. I need the one who has the knowledge that all architects have, which is a more technical thing, as kind of like the baseline.
But I think also maybe it's because architects are not, I feel like most architects are kind of like quiet and hidden.
Yeah.
The project is being built, or even after it's built, like it's kind of quiet. Like the architect is rarely, but maybe now more and more often, which is good, like putting their sign in front of the construction site that says like this is our work, we're designing this house.
Yeah.
So the world around knows they're doing this house, or even get published in magazines, because I think maybe the architects used to work too much in their own shadow to the point where people actually do not know what they're good at, except maybe from like, the older times and what they think maybe that's what architects do. So it's kind of our responsibility again to educate people, but also to share the word out there of what we do.
Yeah.
I think it's great to get published. I think it's great to do interviews. I think it's great to, tell the neighbors that you're working on this house and that's your name. Like, we need to stop being so mysterious and like working in our own bubbles. I think we need to tell people this is what we do.
And I think that's where publicists, magazines, publications, even critics are very important, because could be a full-time job to do that. However, I also agree that architects should probably try and do that.
These people are super important, but I think they tend to focus more on the specific result of a specific project.
Okay.
Where I'm thinking, in general, we need to tell people, in general, what is it that we do, and where is our value in working with us. And not everyone can hire an architect, because it is expensive. It is not for everybody. Not everybody can afford that. But I think even if you don't have that much money to hire an architect for the whole thing, you could still hire an architect to come and look at your house and tell you like maybe 5 ways you can make it better, or look at the floor plan and tell you if it makes sense, or if like one thing could move, and then you could figure out how to do it at a price that makes sense for you. But there's a lot of things that an architect can do, I think, and I don't think people realize that.
I agree with what you're saying. I can also hear some architects being like, please do not call me and ask me to come to your house, like look at it real quick.
No, but there is also architects who would be willing to do that.
I think a lot would, and the other side of that, more talking about the profession, I think too many architects are willing to do that to the detriment of the profession, because they do it for free. They do work for cheap because they want to help somebody, which is great. Of course you want to help somebody, but as much as you want to help other people, all the architects listening, like you're part of a profession, and if the profession is not acting sustainably, then you are doing not only the profession a disservice, but society a disservice in the longer term. And it's hard to think in the long term in that way, and put that pressure and those expectations on a single office. If you're a solopreneur and you're like, it's tough enough to do the work, and someone's asking for your help, and you're like, okay, fine, I'll help you. If it'll be something dirt cheap and you're barely making minimum wage on it, but you want to help the person, it's a really tough ask to tell that architect, you shouldn't do that because you're messing with the profession and, long-term stuff. They'd be like, yeah, but this person needs my help right now. And also I need the work anyway. So what do you want me to do? But that's the conundrum, I think. I think that really, now we're talking about the profession, but I think that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
So there's the other side.
Well, no, but I mean, it's not like, you shouldn't be selling yourself short.
Yeah.
Like, you go to the dentist, he's not going to give you a discount today because, you can afford more than like a $200 crown. No, I'm sorry. There is a price to the service. You can pay in 3 different installments if you want, but that's the price.
Yeah.
Or you don't get your crown. You get some, you have a hole. Like that's
or you
it.
get a wooden crown.
Or you have a wooden crown. You get a cheaper kind. Or you use the one from your grandma that you saved in the jewelry box,
Yeah, I want a nice house. Okay, it's how much it's going to cost. I don't want to pay that. Okay, well then we won't have a nice house.
No, but I mean, but what you bring up is a good point, because it does set precedent for the profession and for other architects who are trying to do other things. And the thing is, the general public doesn't really understand the nuance in the things that we could be working on.
Of course.
And so they hear something from one of their friends who work with that architect, and then therefore that they think that that's it. That's how everybody works. So as a profession, we have to be responsible in how we work. And now, a quick break to thank the sponsors who support the second studio.
Spreadsheets can't bring your designs to life, but Programma can. Say hello to a bespoke integrated software suite built by and for experienced architecture and design professionals. Use your Pinterest image library to build collaborative mood boards, then turn them into shared online presentations with a click using Programma's pin boards. Use the Programma Web Clipper to build a centralized specification library for your studio. Share always up-to-date specifications and product schedules with clients, trades, and colleagues by generating beautiful, branded, live links, and client dashboards. Programma's clean, minimal interface allows your work to shine. Start for free and save 25% on annual plans at programma.design/second studio.
We are supported by Enscape. Enscape is a real-time visualization and VR tool for the AEC industry. It's also a program that we use in our office. And why do we like it? Well, it's a plugin and not a separate application, which means we can work natively in our modeling programs such as Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD, and Vectorworks. It's easy and versatile. We've used many other rendering programs, and many are just way too difficult to use. With Enscape, it's easy to create renderings, 360 panoramas and videos, and immersive VR experiences. It also renders in real time, so you can see the light, shadows, and material as you're working. So start your free trial today by clicking the Enscape 3D link in our show notes. Architects and interior designers, if you're looking to elevate your workflow, then we suggest using the BIM computer program ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architectural and interior design firms around the world to 3D design supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. As ArchiCAD continues to evolve with technological advances, architects can push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. You can start your free, fully functioning trial today by clicking the link in our episode notes.
You know, you were also talking earlier about conveying the value of the architect and architecture to people. People might be surprised, or maybe not, I don't know. But we have come across a fair number of very established architecture offices who understand everything that we're saying and understand architecture from the way that we describe it and the 7 or 8 things I mentioned that go into creating good architecture and the larger mission of architecture of like advancing society. They understand it completely, right? They're not just making beautiful things. They get it. And yet they know when they are pitching to a client or when they have a client and they're pitching, their first design idea, that the best way to convince that client is to filter out all the complex stuff and just talk about it in terms of a very superficial way, just beauty and aesthetics, or some trumped up analogy. Oh, this is like a fallen bird that like fell into the thing and and it's white and the heavens and the sky and whatever, which maybe is valid based on the form, but it's not. It's kind of nonsense, and it doesn't actually talk about like the real value of architecture. And they use these kind of like, I would say, cheap ways of convincing somebody to get it through so they can advance the project.
Are you talking about like people using concepts as a way to sell?
Fake concepts, weak concepts. Not even concepts sometimes. Sometimes it's just, let's just talk about aesthetics and beauty and make someone be very convinced by how well I can give a presentation and talk about the aesthetics of something, right? As opposed to the other 7 things that make that design valuable, right? Because those architects have found in their experience that it's much more difficult to convey those 7 things to somebody and to convince them, like, we should do this for these 7 reasons, right? And they found it's easier to convince them with one reason that is not nearly as substantial as the other 7. But it's convincing.
Well, sometimes you know what I mean? It sounds cooler if you throw something weird up in the air. And the client's like, oh, that's what designers do, Like, my architect is doing me this, like, bird feather shaped house, and that's the concept, and everybody is in awe, and nobody like raise their hand and be like, wait, what is it in a bird feather shaped house? Do you live on top of a tree? Like, how is that relevant? No, I'm like in the beachfront in SoCal, and there's no birds around, but why not? But I think that's weak. I think that if the client agrees with that, maybe also it means that they're not really questioning things enough,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like at that point, it's like art.
Yeah.
I would say there is like some cheap art, and there is some art that actually took like years of thinking to get to,
Right. And there's like meaning and depth behind it.
There's meaning and depth. Like you could say anyone could do art.
Right.
Okay, yeah, but again, is it like little lowercase art or capital A art?
Yeah.
Is it something that's replicable? Is it something that you could have done? Like, what makes it art, right? So it's kind of a similar.
Well, it's not just the skill set required in the craft skills to produce an artwork or an architecture. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying that concepts are bad, because I believe the complete opposite. It's more like if from the first person perspective of an architect, if you're designing a scheme, a building, right? And this building performs and makes sense for a bunch of different reasons that are complicated and all kind of like interwoven and not easily explainable in an elevator pitch, right? But that's why it makes sense. And that's also the nature of architecture. It's just really complicated, all this stuff happening at once. And yes, there is a convincing concept, a true concept, but that to convince the client of it, the easier path is to not talk about the actual concept and not talk about the 8 other performative things, but just talk about, again, like whatever froofy stuff that's glitzy and looks cool. And I'm going to wear like a leather jacket to the meeting, and whoa. And now the client's convinced. And I know a lot of architects who do that, and I get it, but it freaking bothers me. I'm like, what are you doing? Because in some cases, I'm like, I know that you're part of a big office and that office is successful. So I think that you should be trying really hard to convey the true value of architecture. Versus if you're a one-man show or one-person show and you were living paycheck to paycheck and you needed to convince this client of that thing and you chose the shortcut route, I would be much more lenient. Because look, I get it. Like, you need the money to survive and you're trying to get through. Fine. But if you're not in that position, you have an obligation to explain it. And it's nonsense that you don't. And you take the easier path. So something that really bothers me.
It's kind of random, but I'm glad you were able to vent a little bit.
I mean, it's talking about the value of architecture and again, conveying it, right? And maybe people don't understand it. It was because we're not doing it,
Well, and actually, it's interesting too, like how architects can devalue the profession is another good question. Like I think there is many ways we can bring value, but also there is many ways we can take value out of what we do by, cutting ourselves short when we sell our services, by not caring about the clients. There is a lot of architects out there that take on projects and they do it just for the money and actually don't care at all about who they're designing for, which to me is, how can you even be an architect? Like, you don't design buildings just for the sake of designing buildings. You're designing buildings because somebody is going to be using it one way or the other. Right?
Yeah.
That's how you should be thinking.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope.
Or like, I don't know. I think there's many ways we can take values out of our profession.
So the other, I think, value of architecture, which is the most elusive and maybe not worthwhile talking about so much, is more on the larger scale of society. And this is something that I think people would find interesting, that most architects that we know in school and the education, which is very formative for most architects, you were taught to think about architecture as this very important part of society and culture. And that as an architect, you're producing things that are making a contribution to society in a functional way, but also in a cultural sense. So the architecture you produce is simultaneously an expression of contemporary culture. It's also a criticism of culture, and it's also a way to advance culture, right? Now, think about that, though. Think about that idea that most architects they just basic, simple, nice houses. That is the seed that was implanted into their mind when they were training to become an architect. And trust me, once that gets in there and you read and you study it, because it's true, all the things I said are true, it never leaves, right? That is the other value of architecture, capital A architecture, that's for sure there. And every architect aspires to do that. Every architect wants that to happen for themselves, for them to create it, and other people to create it. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but I think that's another part of it too that's even probably the least well-known by the general public when they're considering hiring an architect or looking at architects?
Well, the whole legacy of a building and life of a building beyond, who it is meant for today is a question, again, I feel like doesn't really exist in this country.
Whoa.
No, but it's true. People here don't build to keep the buildings forever. I mean, they keep it for their lifetime, maybe, or like half of their lifetime, and then they're gonna change, buy a new one, take it down, build again. Like it's building here in the U.S. is gonna have a currency. It's not really a heritage in that sense. Like it's not a something you pass on.
Yeah,
to the next generation, which is very interesting because there's so much value attached to real estate, right, and architecture and buildings in general. But they're more like cards that we just keep swapping back and forth around. It's not a card that you hold on to for the rest of your life. Or if you do, well, then maybe it's because, your grandma or your grandparents bought that house and it stayed in the family. They kept it as a family house or whatever. But it's not really people's goals or mindset.
It's a little bit different from what I was saying, but I think that's very interesting. So just to clarify, I was talking more about architects when they go to design something, they want to design something that answers the questions I posed.
Yeah.
Right. Which you don't often get to do because you have to have the right client, first of all. Like who's going to want to be, what client's going to be interested in that, generally speaking. But I think that what you're talking about is maybe more from the client's perspective. And again, going back to maybe the real estate value. The real estate properties are traded like cards, like you mentioned, but they're almost traded like blank cards. And the value of the card is just the card, the fact that there's a physical card that's blank. And the artwork on the card is like kind of secondary. Like I don't really care if there's artwork on the card. It's very different from like if you had a card that had this beautiful painting that was done by whatever big artist of that time. And you thought to myself, I'm going to pay a lot of money to buy this blank card and have someone create this beautiful painting on this tiny card. And it's going to be so amazing. It's going to be this thing I hold on to my entire life. I'm going to pass it down from generation to generation because it's beautiful. You're right, though. That's not the mentality people have with most houses and architecture. It's more like, buy it, flip it, sell it later on.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's also why architects have a hard time actually selling their true value to people because that mindset is so short in their lifespan.
I think you're true. I think that's 100% correct.
Like the building and the houses, we only care for them for like 10, 15, maybe 20 years. I
mean people in general.
People who hire architects and designers, right? Like they only just care about those houses just for a short period of time. If you find a client who cares about it because they want their kids to live in it, they want their grandkids to, inherit it when they pass and all of that stuff, that's a totally different approach. It's a different mindset.
I think also the other long-term mentality is let me commission an architect to create something that's going to be really cool and it's going to last for a long time because it's a long-term structure. It's not like Type 5 framing with some gyp and whatever. Like this is a long-term structure. That's maybe more of the like art collector side in a certain sense. Both of those, the lineage versus creating artwork are both valid, are both valuable actually, but in very, very different ways. I think you're correct though. Most people don't think that long term, and I don't blame them necessarily either, right? Because most folks, they live in a house, they want to do some work to it. They're going to be in the house for maybe 10 years or so, maybe 15, maybe somewhere around there, and that's not quite long enough for them to be taking it as seriously as an architect would, right?
Yeah.
In addition to that, though, this mentality and an approach to real estate and houses and architecture is incredibly fucking wasteful.
No, but that's the thing, right? Like, there is single family homes, that's one thing. But then there is like just general buildings, right? If we were just building those, let's say, supportive buildings that we need around in towns and cities.
Like offices, restaurants.
Like little shops or like, stuff like that. That's... they're like little structures. If we could build them in a way that they would last long in time, like we don't need to demolish them to replace what goes in it, and that's where adaptive reuse is very popular, and it's kind of like fascinating. But that's a very common practice in Europe, where you use an old building that used to be something else, and now today it's used for another thing.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's extremely wasteful. It's wasteful in money, materials. It's wasteful in time. Yeah. It's wasteful in everything. And I don't know, like maybe, like zoning code and cities have all of this kind of like sometimes stupid regulation, right? Well, why don't they make it a requirement to build buildings that would last for a good chunk of time? And guess what?
Yeah.
If the building stays up for the next 25 years, and it could serve a different communities, different people, and whatever, while it gets some sort of, I don't know, credit or mention, or it's classified as part of, some special buildings in the city or something, again, you have to think about the reward program of incentivizing people.
Yeah, no, it's a whole another topic and very interesting one. And I think I might have mentioned this in a recording that might not come out before this one, but architects talk about sustainability a lot. And we have different ways of building sustainably, sourcing sustainable materials, having new tech, and all that stuff. But really, the most way to be sustainable is adaptive reuse. It's to not tear down stuff and make use of what's already there. Now, there's some places like San Francisco where they take it so far where it's actually the opposite of helpful. They want to retain things so much that it's actually unsustainable. It's like we're having to do more work and use more materials to work around this existing thing that has no value, no historical architectural value, no design value, no structural value, but you just want to keep it because of some dumb rule set. Anyway, it's a little bit of
No.
But so, but adaptive reuse is critical, but it doesn't always make sense, of course. Like there's a lot of houses out there that are just old construction, and construction technology, particularly in the States, I'll admit, has evolved a lot. And that also means that there's a period of time where things were built by today's standards very, very poorly.
Yeah.
50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s.
It's like in Europe too. Like there was structures.
That's true, yeah. But you guys also have structures that are like way older that are like doing pretty good.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, to tell you it's amazing. And even if you don't pass your property to your kids or your grandkids, I think thinking that someone else could reuse it, it's an interesting idea. Like I love thinking about the many lives of the buildings and all the things that could happen in it in many different ways.
Real quick, what's funny about that is there's a lot of conversation on this show about when an architect goes to design a building or to enter a space or whatever, right? That it's always, a lot of it is about being as specific as possible to that project. And most architects will say this too, right? What makes the project unique? Oh, because of the site, because of the client, because of the budget, because of the client, all those things, because of the program. And so you might think, therefore, then, okay, well, then how can you produce something that is that specific and then have it last to where it can be used for other things later on? And there's some truth to that for sure, especially program, right? But if you create an architecture that just feels good, like the space feels good, the light is good, and all those things, it'll feel good no matter what's going on in there, And I think that's also... There's an aspect of architecture when you design something really well, not only is it custom fit like a glove, but it's just good, period. And it'll outlast whatever program is within there.
Yeah.
I
was thinking about the whole, keeping buildings for a longer time and how buildings somehow are expressive of a time, a place, a population, whatever, right? And how if you don't keep any around, there is no trace of what was there before,
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing, and I don't know what the ideal scenario is, if it's to keep everything so you can kind of drive around town and see, everything that has happened in this town from the 1200 to today. Like, I don't know that you need that. Or if it's better to be in a place where everything just keeps being renewed and you don't really live in the past. You kind of live in the present and the future.
It depends on the scales. I mean, that already happens, right? I mean, there are definitely civilizations that existed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. They're gone. Their architecture, for the most part, is gone. I mean, you have some pyramids and some things like that, but like all that stuff is gone. It's not relevant anymore, and it's not, as it wasn't maintained or kept. I don't know, that you're opening up a whole conversation here, because there are entire cities and places, like in Italy, for example, they have that problem because they want to retain, understandably so, a lot of their architecture, but then you can't build anything new, and you're kind of stuck. Like, okay, so what do you do for the rest of the life of the country? You just stay that? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think if you keep everything, or if you renew everything all the time, it's kind of it's the same scenario in both cases, right? You don't really have a mark or a cohabitation of the two together.
Yeah, it's these are the kinds of questions that I remember being posed, mostly like during school, and you're like, I don't know.
No, but it's interesting because if you think about it socially, like as a society, right? Like, what does it do to how you think? And
are you thinking more in the span of 100 years or over centuries? Because they're different.
Well, let's say centuries, because otherwise you don't really see a whole lot of differences.
I would say like within 150 years is more of an interesting kind of time. I think when you start to talk about like 300 years, 400 years, like no one can control that, because everyone that controls anything now dead. So whatever people want to do in the future, they're going to do what they want to do. I don't know if like thinking that large of the scale is, first of all, it gives me a headache, but I think it's more like, okay, in my view, at a smaller scale, and this is probably not answering your questions, but as long as you can produce an architecture that is both answering the current questions of the people that are going to be using the building, right, like when it gets built, and is sustainable. I don't mean in terms of like the ecology of things, but sustainable in terms of it being a worthy piece of architecture. So it has implications for the future, and also somehow it's honoring what's been done before, or honoring the place it's within and the culture of that place. That's the best you can do. And first of all, and also that's like really, really difficult to do, but that's the best you can do.
I mean, I also don't think that contemporary buildings will be able to last centuries, just because in the very many million pieces they're made of.
I think you're right.
It's just calling for breakage. I mean, the only thing that lasted centuries and centuries are things that were made of stone with like punched opening, no glass, no windows, right?
Yeah.
Because
no sealants.
No, it's like the only thing that disappeared was the paint on the wall because it faded over time. But and maybe that's why things are the way it is here, because no matter what we build now, it's not gonna last.
Yeah, it could be.
So why trying?
Could be. Could be. I mean, I was thinking more of like we were talking with someone. Well, they're older and they're kind of unhappy with a lot of the changes that were taking place, architectural changes, like new houses coming in that were of a different style. And first of all, some of the new houses being built are ugly and atrocious. So that's that.
Too many of them.
To me, but there were a couple people were speaking with about this, and they felt like this doesn't make sense for the place. Like this is random and it's just disregarding all the architecture of this area, this region. Of course, they're talking to us, and we do contemporary work, so we're generally on the side of like, let's just do something new and something interesting. But again, it's about balancing on that fence or being on that fine line of something that is new, but also it somehow makes sense for the place.
Well, but it's also because what's existing is crap. I mean, no, but I mean in terms of quality of construction.
Oh yeah.
It's like rodent sticks. Like, why keeping this?
Like, there's that. Okay, yeah, that's true too. Like, just from a construction standpoint, you got to tear it down. There's no value there.
Yeah.
But in terms of replicating the style, though, like, do you tear it down and do something similar to what was there before, or do something new, right?
Yeah, but then that's why you get into the weird territory of like replicating stuff that is a replica of a replica of a replica from somewhere else. And then nobody knows what it is anymore. But you know what? It's standard around here. So that's what everybody does. And again, you got to question it, you know?
Yeah. And it's also not like, it's not just because you copy or do a replicant of a existing style that therefore that new house in these cases is validated. No, absolutely not. Like what makes a house valid is that would be one fraction of the criteria, you know. And the same thing goes for a new house, for new types of designs, new styles in a neighborhood. Just because it's new and different, for sure does not make it good. Like absolutely not.
No, and if you're replicating it, you're actually replicating the problems.
Yeah, that's true too.
You know, which is not good.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap this up because I'm getting drowsy. I think this recording was a success, despite the technical difficulties we had. But you know, it makes it raw and live again. So, anything else to say at the end before the outro?
No, that's so
it.
good.
Let's eat some dinner and take a nap. All right, everybody, check the links for the for this house. Super cool. And again, if you're trying to stay in a place, check it out for Airbnb. I think they're probably booked up for like...
They're probably booked up pretty in advance, so you probably have to be a little bit organized as to when you want to come. But I think it's definitely worth it.
It's worth it.
And if you can come to this Airbnb, maybe look at Airbnb around you that might have some sort of interesting design value. I think it's always good.
We should do that now. Actually, when we go places, we should.
That's what I said. I told you that. You make it sound like it's your brilliant idea. No, I told you that.
All right, well, it's
and I mean, and I think any designers listening, I think, you know, like it's hard to take time off of work and travel and do all these big things, but maybe just take a getaway weekend and stay in like a cool place, which actually makes me, you know, there's a huge Airbnb business now, you know, of people hiring architects to design like very cool Airbnbs for people to stay at, which is great. But I'm like, we need to have more people hiring architects for their own home, you know, because it's great to make somebody's vacation or weekend feel amazing. But what needs to happen is to make people's daily life feel amazing, you know?
Well, you know, that is a pitch sort of to have more cool Airbnbs.
So people would want that at home.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
little appetizers. Sprinkle them everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Give us an outro. Who are we? What are we doing? Where are we from? What?
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this after our episode. A few bumps along the road, but it was fun. If you like what we do, please leave us a review. You can find us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or on most social media, Facebook, Twitter, but mostly Instagram, where you can reach us by DM or also share our stories, and why not? We have the website.
Has a website. It does.
Yeah. secondstudiopod.com.
Podcast also has a hotline.
213-222-6950.
Yep. And you can text it or leave a voicemail. We've got, well, this comes out later. But text it and then I'll try and reply, or we'll answer your question on the show. And of course, the office has like all that stuff too. So just keep a look. We're around. Find us.
We're around.
We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.